This interview is for information only and should not be considered as investment advice or a recommendation to buy shares in the company featured. Welcome to this Stockbox interview. Joining me on Stockbox today is the CEO of Bannerman Energy, Brandon Munro. Now, Bannerman are an ASX and OTCQB listed company with a uranium interest in Namibia. So hello, Brandon. Thank you very much for your time. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, Mark. Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be on.
Yes, thank you very much for joining us. So I wonder if you can start us off by introducing the company, the Etango Project, and what you're all about.
Bannerman Energy is a uranium developer, and we are entirely focused on our flagship project, which is the Etango Uranium Project in Namibia, in Southern Africa. We've been involved in this sector and Namibia since 2005. So we are very much embedded into the sector, focused on the sector, and we've got a very advanced asset with the Etango that we're looking to bring through definitive feasibility study over the next 12 months.
Okay. Now, the uranium price has certainly been doing very well recently. It's attracted a lot more attention. What is the investment case for uranium in your words?
Well, it has been doing very well just in the last month in particular, and that's been driven by the establishment of a new physical uranium investment vehicle called Sprott Physical Uranium Trust. And their business model is to raise money, buy uranium, and hold it into the longer term as an investment vehicle. Now, over and above that, the key macros driving this space is that, first of all, demand is growing. Uranium is the unsubstitutable fuel source for nuclear power, and nuclear power still provides more than 10% of the world's electricity and is the largest single source of emissions-free power after hydropower. Mm-hmm. Now, as well as that demand growth profile, we've got a declining supply profile, and that's because of underinvestment in the sector over a long bear market and also mature and current mined assets that are depleting in terms of their scale. They're quite literally running out of ore. So you've got a strong demand and a declining supply with underinvestment, which sets up a very attractive supply-demand deficit going forward.
Okay. I wonder if you can perhaps just tell me a little bit about the market for uranium. You mentioned there we've got a supply-demand deficit, and I know that uranium has been in a bear market for quite a long time. Can you give some rationale as to perhaps why that was, why the renewed interest, and is it really driven by nuclear power? I mean, does the future of energy belong to nuclear?
Well, I certainly believe so. And whilst nuclear power hasn't always enjoyed a lot of public support in certain markets, and there's been a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about nuclear power, both its virtues and its risks, I think this is changing. Policymakers and societies are being required to confront nuclear power's benefits and advantages in the chase for decarbonisation. And I really think that's happening before our very eyes in Europe, certainly in the US, which has bipartisan support for nuclear now, and in other important growing markets like China. It's been in a bear market for the last 10 years, really, because of the Fukushima accident in Japan. And whilst that had a very contained impact, it was wildly exaggerated by both the media and various anti-nuclear groups. And what was a very large-scale natural disaster that killed 18,000 people has been somehow linked to the Fukushima reactor accident, which didn't directly kill anyone. No one has died from radiation because of that accident. So that punched a hole in demand. We lost about 10% of the demand for the sector worldwide very quickly. And there wasn't a sufficient supply response, which led to declining prices to the point where, until even very recently, the uranium traded spot price was well below the cost of production for a substantial part of world mined uranium. That's clearly unsustainable, and that's what's now starting to unravel with a little bit of help from the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust.
Okay. Now, you've mentioned the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust a couple of times. Can you give me an idea of what that's all about?
So that's a TSX listed investment vehicle. They have units in both Canadian dollars and US dollars. And only a month ago, they launched what's called an at-the-market facility. In simple terms, that enables them to issue new units and therefore raise money on a daily basis, and on a daily basis, deploy that new capital to buying uranium. So we've seen them in the last 20 trading days, they've bought uranium on 18 of those days. Anything between, say, £100,000, which was what they bought overnight, to £1.25 million in a single day. And through doing that, they've done a couple of things. They've created some price discovery in a market that had been very illiquid. And through that price discovery, we've learned that by applying that rather extraordinary level of demand, we've learned that there isn't very much supply available, and therefore the price has gone up. So as a result of that, the price has gone up from approximately $30 a pound to last night it closed above $48 a pound. And that's quite dramatic for 1 month.
Indeed. Yeah, that is very dramatic. Okay. Well, let's look at the project now, the Etango Project. First of all, it's in Namibia. Can you give me an idea of what Namibia is like? What's the jurisdiction like to operate in?
Well, I can, as a matter of fact, because I lived there for almost 6 years and I've spent a lot of time going backwards and forwards. I moved to Namibia in 2009 with Bannerman and lived there as general manager initially. And then after Fukushima, I left Bannerman but stayed in Namibia and set up a copper exploration company. And after selling that company in 2015 and coming back to Perth, I came back to Bannerman. So I've had a long association with Namibia and Namibian uranium. Mm-hmm. It's a great country to live in. It's a great country to visit. To probably the best way of understanding just how safe and secure and serene the country is, Lonely Planet Guide describes it as Africa for beginners. So if anyone's got the idea of visiting Africa as a tourist and they're perhaps just a little bit shy and nervous about the whole thing, well, look, Namibia is your place. And that extends as well to the business environment. We have achieved an extraordinary amount in a very frictionless way in Namibia. It's safe, secure. It's got the second lowest population density in the world, which really makes a big difference for how society works there. And it's investment friendly with a strong mining code. So they're all of the more generic pluses of operating in Namibia. But when it comes to considering a uranium development, it then really goes into a league of its own. And that's because Namibia has been exporting uranium for more than 45 years through the Rossing uranium mine, which until recently was owned by Rio Tinto and is now owned by the Chinese nuclear giant, CNNC. And that means that all of the infrastructure there, all of the multilateral treaty obligations have been in place for decades. There's a deep water port at Walfish Bay that exports uranium from 3 different mines. So there's a frequency of shipping. There's fantastic infrastructure. And our project, the Etango Project, is the closest to the local town and the local port, and only 20 kilometres from the Husab uranium mine that was constructed by another Chinese giant, CGN, and probably 30 kilometres as the crow flies from that Rossing uranium mine that I referred to.
Okay, good. So what stage is the Etango project at the moment then?
Well, it's a more complicated answer than you might expect. Right now, we are completing a definitive feasibility study on our Etango 8 project. But the reason I say it's a little bit more complicated is we've been there before. We have completed a definitive feasibility study and in fact run a pilot plant at Etango. It's just that we were doing it at a much bigger scale. So to give you a couple of numbers, Mark, when we completed the definitive feasibility study in 2012, that was for a project that was 20 million tonnes processing to deliver 7.2 million pounds per annum of uranium. And that is a giant. That would have put it in the top 10 uranium mines in the world. And that was enough to service 16 or 17 conventional gigawatt scale nuclear reactors. So a very, very big player. Now, as I said before, there was a demand hole after Fukushima, and that project in a bear market was perhaps a bit too big. So what we started doing a couple of years ago is analysing how we might approach the development of Etango to get into production initially at a smaller scale and then expand into potentially that 20 million tonnes that we envisaged with the DFS. So about a year ago, we released a scoping study on what we've called Etango 8. The 8 refers to 8 million tonnes instead of 20. And at the beginning of last month, we released a pre-feasibility study on Etango 8. So it's a bit of an unusual one because although we are completing a DFS, we have been there before on a bigger, more complex project. So all of the things that would take a lot of time, cost a lot of money, and potentially introduce some project risk have already been done. So it's a fairly smooth path here to completion of the DFS. The other thing that's really notable about our project, particularly in the context of uranium, is we do have environmental approvals in place. And uranium still can be problematic in certain jurisdictions and can be politically sensitive and environmentally sensitive as well. So to have an environmental clearance under our belt is a really strong attribute for this project and its go-forward development.
Okay. So you're in the process of completing the DFS. Can you give me an idea of the timeline and the roadmap and the path to development? Because that is the plan, isn't it, to take it all the way to development?
Correct. So we expect to have the DFS done in about a year. There'll be a period of marketing and financing after that. And we would want to be confident that the pricing is appropriate. We're in a very sharply rising price environment. So we would have to take a view that that was the appropriate time to lock in prices, not to let it run a little bit further. But assuming that we did that, we would then move through to a 2-year construction program and be in production during 2025. And that's also quite notable. There's only a handful of substantial sized uranium mines in the world that are able to comply with that sort of timetable, that have got environmental approvals. And we're one of the very biggest at still 3.5 million pounds per annum proposed annual production. So that's enough for 7 to 8 gigawatt scale conventional nuclear reactors. That's a huge amount of power output that can be delivered from the uranium produced at our mine.
Okay. Now, I know when we were talking just before we started recording about different investment propositions for uranium for investors who want exposure to the sector, there is not a whole lot of choice, but there are a few companies out there. But can you perhaps give me 2 or 3 reasons as why investors should consider investing in Bannerman Energy?
Well, the feedback that I'm getting at the moment as to why investors are so excited about Bannerman tends to relate to its leverage and its scale. And it's very buoyant out there. So investors are looking for the biggest bang for their buck. And in terms of that, we've got exceptional leverage because of not only the scale, the size of Etango 8 with the 3.5 million pound per annum, but then that capacity to scale up. And we still do have the 20 million tonne per annum project as an option. That DFS hasn't gone anywhere. So if we get to financing and the market continues to increase, and there's enough demand for a bigger mine, we could always deliver that instead of the smaller one. Mm-hmm. And in terms of scale, our resource is 208 million pounds, an enormous resource. And with the Etango 8, it's a 60 million pound reserve within that. So what you can deduce from that is that there's a very real potential to either expand the production capability, as I've said, or extend the mine life beyond the initial 15 years. So scale and leverage would be the first one. The second one would be jurisdiction. As I've said, it's extremely important in uranium that you know that you won't have an environmental roadblock or a community roadblock or a political roadblock or someone changing the laws or not being able to transport the material or not being able to export the material. So all of those boxes are ticked in for Namibia. So for investors who really know this space and understand this space, they latch onto that. And look, I think if we were to come up with a third, we do have very strong management and a very good management track record. I've been with the company since 2016, and we've built a team who have uranium expertise and Namibian expertise. So what that means is when there comes the inevitable labour shortage of expertise in this space because of the amount of heat in the sector, we've got the key roles and the key positions covered from which we can then build out a bigger team.
I don't think that can be underestimated. Like you say, if the sector's been down in a down market for quite a while and there's a lack of expertise, to have that already in place is invaluable, really. So thank you very much for giving us those reasons. Brandon Munro, the CEO of Bannerman Energy, thank you very much for your time.
Terrific. Thanks again for the opportunity, Mark.
Thank you for listening to this Stockbox interview. For more information, interviews and videos, visit our website at stockboxmedia.com or give us a follow on Twitter by searching @StockboxMedia.